The massive space station called Nexus Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was the size of a small moon, home to millions of beings from across the galaxy. Today, something was different. Something was wrong. In the Great Council Chamber, hundreds of alien representatives sat in their assigned seats. The room buzzed with excited chatter in dozens of languages, but one seat remained empty. The human seat. Speaker Vextar stood at the center of the chamber. His blue skin shimmered under the bright lights. His 4 arms gestured as he spoke to the crowd. "Fellow counselors," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "We gather today to discuss the future of our galaxy, a future free from the constant interference of primitive species." Many aliens nodded their heads in agreement. The reptilians hissed with pleasure. The crystalline beings chimed like bells. The void hunters clicked their claws against their chairs, but the human seat stayed empty. 3 months ago, Ambassador Kang Daeho had been sitting in that chair. He was a middle-aged man with kind eyes and gray hair. For 20 years, he had been humanity's voice in the council. He always spoke calmly. He always tried to find peace between fighting species. He never raised his voice or made threats. On that day 3 months ago, the council had been arguing about what they called primitive species management. Some aliens wanted to enslave weaker races. Others wanted to destroy planets that had resources they needed. The arguments grew louder and angrier. Kang Daeho had stood up slowly. He gathered his papers and put them in his briefcase. He picked up his water glass and drank the last drop. Then he walked toward the exit. "Ambassador Kang," Speaker Vextar had called out. "Where are you going? We are not finished with today's session." Kang Daeho stopped at the door. He turned around and looked at the council chamber one last time. His eyes were sad but determined. He said nothing. He simply walked out and never came back. At first, the council thought he would return. Humans always came back. They were predictable that way. They cared too much about everyone else to just leave. But days passed, then weeks, then months. The human seat remained empty. Soon, reports came from all over the galaxy. Dr. Choi Mina, Earth's top scientist studying alien diseases, had finished her work on the Andorian plague. She sent all her research to the medical center and then went silent. Her laboratory on Research Station 7 was found empty, cleaned out completely. Captain Park Ji-ho commanded the human fleet's largest ship, Soul's Pride. It was a massive vessel that patrolled the dangerous outer rim of the galaxy. He filed his final patrol report and then disappeared. His ship was found drifting empty near the Terran border. Trade stations run by humans suddenly closed. The humans who worked there packed up their belongings and left. They paid all their bills, completed all their contracts, and then vanished. Human. Engineers who maintained the galaxy's jump gates sent final status reports and abandoned their posts. Human doctors treating patients in alien hospitals finished their surgeries and walked away. Human teachers in multi-species schools completed their lessons and never returned. It was like a ghost had passed through the galaxy, taking every human with it. The strange thing was how quiet it all was. No angry speeches, no demands for better treatment. No threats or ultimatums. The humans simply left. Speaker Vextar was pleased. "Finally," he announced to the council, "we are free from their constant meddling. No more of their primitive ideas about rights for lesser species. No more of their emotional responses to logical decisions. No more of their ridiculous belief that all life has value." The other council members agreed. The hegemony representative laughed with his 3 mouths. "Good riddance," he said. "Now we can expand our territory without their whining about civilian casualties." The Void Hunter's leader clicked her mandibles. "Yes. Now we can harvest planets efficiently without their protests about environmental protection." But far away from the council chamber, on a blue planet called Earth, something very different was happening. Admiral Lee Sunwoo stood in a room deep underground. Around him sat the leaders of humanity's government. The room was simple and clean, with white walls and bright lights. On the big screen at the front, numbers and charts showed the status of Operation Silent Sky. "All personnel have been successfully extracted," reported Commander Nam Hyun-sik. "Every human citizen in council space has returned home safely. The recall is complete." Admiral Lee nodded. He was an old man with silver hair and tired eyes. He had seen too much in his long career, too many wars, too many treaties broken by species who thought might made right, too many times when humanity tried to help, only to be called weak and primitive. "How long did it take?" asked President Jin. "Yongsoo, 3 months, sir," replied Commander Nam. "Just as planned. We pulled out our people slowly, carefully. We finished all our jobs. We honored all our contracts. We left everything clean and organized." And their reaction? Exactly what we expected. They think they won. They think they got rid of a problem. Admiral Lee walked to the window. Outside, he could see the lights of cities stretching to the horizon. 7 billion humans lived on this world. Billions more lived on colonies throughout human space. They were safe now, protected, free from the Council's endless demands and dismissive attitudes. "Sir," asked a young officer, "what do we do now?" "Admiral." Lee smiled, but it was not a happy smile. Now we wait. We watch. We let them discover what a galaxy without humans looks like. President Jin stood up. She was a tall woman with sharp eyes and a determined expression. "The Council wanted to be rid of us. They called us primitive and emotional. They said our values were weaknesses. Our compassion was foolishness. Our desire for peace was naive." She paused and looked around the room at the faces of humanity's leaders. "Well, they got their wish. Let them enjoy their superior civilization. Let them solve their own problems with their advanced wisdom. Let them build their perfect galaxy without our primitive interference." On the screen, reports continued to come in. The last human cargo ship had crossed into Terran space. The last human research station had been evacuated. The borders were sealed. Humanity had left the galaxy without a word. Now they would see what happened next. The silence had begun. 6 months had passed since the humans disappeared. At first, everything seemed normal in the galaxy. The Council met as usual. Trade continued. Ships moved between the stars. But slowly, cracks began to appear. The first sign of trouble came from the border between two powerful species. The Thraxians and the Molari had been fighting over 3 star systems for decades. Their war had been bloody and endless, with neither side able to win completely. For years, human diplomats had worked to keep the peace. They set up meetings between the two sides. They helped write treaties. When fighting broke out, humans rushed in to negotiate ceasefires. The war never ended, but it never got completely out of control either. Now there were no human mediators. The Thraxian fleet attacked the Molari colony on Kepler 7. The assault was brutal and swift. Millions died in the first hour. The Molari responded by destroying 2 Thraxian mining stations, killing everyone aboard. Councillor Zethai of the Molari Empire demanded action from the Council. She stood in the great chamber, her tentacles writhing with anger. "Where are the mediators?" she shouted. "Who will help us negotiate with these monsters? Who will arrange the peace talks?" Speaker Vextar looked uncomfortable. He had never negotiated anything more complex than a trade agreement. The Council's own diplomats were trained only in giving orders and making threats. They knew how to dominate weaker species, but they had no idea how to make peace between equals. "Perhaps," suggested Councillor Irix of the Reptilian Alliance, "you should simply surrender to the stronger force." "Which force is stronger?" demanded Zethai. "We are equal in power. That is why this war has lasted so long." The council argued for hours but reached no solution. The Thraxian-Molari War grew worse each day. Meanwhile, other problems were appearing across the galaxy. On Research Station Deep Haven, Dr. Lim Jaiwan's laboratory sat empty and dark. She had been working on something called quantum biological interfaces. It was complicated science that mixed human intuition with alien logic. Other species found her methods strange and unpredictable, but they worked. Dr. Lim had been close to a major breakthrough in treating the Andorian plague. This disease was killing millions of Andorians every year. Their own doctors could not cure it. Neither could the other advanced species in the galaxy. But Dr. Lim had a different approach. She studied how humans and aliens thought differently about biology. She found ways to combine their knowledge that no one else had tried. Her research was almost complete when she received the recall order. Now her work sat unfinished. The Andorian plague continued to spread. Other scientists tried to continue her research, but they could not understand her methods. Human thinking was too different, too creative, too willing to try impossible combinations of ideas. The Andorians sent desperate messages to Earth, begging for Dr. Lim to return. They offered huge amounts of money, rare minerals, even entire planets. The messages went unanswered. Trade was becoming a problem, too. The Great Trade Network connected thousands of worlds across the galaxy. Ships carried goods from one end of space to the other. The system was incredibly complex, with millions of routes and schedules that had to work perfectly together. Captain Song Mirai had designed most of the trade network's logistics. She was a brilliant woman who could see patterns that others missed. She had warned the council many times that the system needed constant management. It was not enough to just follow the rules. Someone had to watch for problems and fix them quickly. The council had dismissed her warnings. Human thinking is too complicated, they said. Our automated systems can handle simple trade routes. But the trade routes were not simple. They were living things that changed every day. New colonies needed supplies. Old routes became dangerous when pirates moved in. Natural disasters closed some paths and opened others. Without human oversight, the system began to fail. Ships arrived at empty stations. Cargo sat in warehouses with no one to claim it. Colonies that depended on regular supplies began to run out of food and medicine. On Centauri 5, a mining colony lost contact with their human technical advisors. The mining equipment was extremely advanced and needed constant maintenance. The human engineers who ran it had tried to train local workers, but the aliens found human technology confusing. When the equipment started breaking down, the alien workers did not know how to fix it. They sent distress calls, but the human engineers were gone. The mine collapsed, trapping hundreds of workers underground. Many died before rescue teams could reach them. Similar disasters happened on dozens of worlds. Terraforming projects failed without human environmental scientists. Space stations drifted out of orbit without human navigation experts. Medical centers could not treat certain diseases without human doctors who understood multi-species biology. Commander Nam Hyun-sik monitored all of this from his post at the Terran border. His job was to watch for incoming ships and protect human space. Every day, alien vessels approached the border. They were not warships. They were merchants, refugees, and diplomats. The aliens offered bribes for safe passage through human space. They begged for help with their failing systems. They asked for just a few human experts to return and fix their problems. Commander Nam forwarded all requests to his superiors with the same notation. Protocol 7. No response. Protocol 7 was simple. Complete silence. No communication with any non-human entity for any reason. The border was closed. Some of the alien ships waited at the border for days or weeks, hoping for a response that never came. Others tried to force their way in and were turned back by automated defense systems. A few tried to sneak across the border but were caught and gently escorted out. No violence was used. No threats were made. The message was clear through action alone. humanity was not available. Back on Earth, President Jin Yong-su addressed the United Colonies in a speech that was broadcast to every human world. We offered partnership. They wanted servants. We offered wisdom. They wanted obedience. We offered peace. They wanted conquest. For centuries, we tried to show them a better way. They called us weak, primitive, and emotional. She paused and looked directly into the camera. Now, they can build their perfect galaxy without us. Let them use their superior logic and advanced thinking to solve their problems. We will not interfere. We will not help. We will not return until they understand what they have lost. The first cracks were showing, but they were still small. The Council still believed they were better off without humanity. They still thought their problems were temporary difficulties that would soon be solved. They had no idea how much worse things were about to become. 1 year had passed since humanity disappeared. The small cracks in galactic civilization had become deep fractures. What started as minor problems had grown into disasters that threatened entire species. The Great Trade Network was collapsing. Captain Song Mirai had built the system using complex algorithms that adapted to changing conditions. She had tried to explain to the Council that trade routes were like living organisms. They needed constant care and adjustment to stay healthy. The Council had laughed at her primitive biological thinking. They preferred simple, logical systems that followed clear rules. They replaced her adaptive algorithms with basic automated programs. Now, the results were clear. The rigid programs could not handle unexpected changes. When pirates attacked a major trade route, the system could not redirect traffic quickly enough. When a solar storm destroyed a relay station, ships continued to follow the old routes and got lost in space. Sector by sector, the network was failing. Ships arrived at wrong destinations with cargo no one needed. Planets that depended on imported food began to starve. Medical supplies rotted in warehouses while sick populations died for lack of treatment. The hegemony tried to take control of the remaining trade routes. They sent warships to force merchants to follow their orders. But the hegemony only understood conquest, not commerce. Their heavy-handed approach made the problems worse. Without human oversight, the strong began to prey openly on the weak. For years, humans had protected smaller species from aggression. They had created safe zones where developing civilizations could grow without fear. They had negotiated treaties that limited how powerful species could expand their territory. Now, those protections were gone. The hegemony attacked the Epsilon colonies without warning. The Epsilon were a peaceful species who had never built warships. They survived by trading their beautiful artwork and advanced mathematics for protection from stronger neighbors. Humans had guaranteed their safety for over 2 centuries. But humans were gone. The hegemony enslaved the entire Epsilon species in a single brutal campaign. Millions of artists, scientists, and philosophers were forced to work in labor camps. Their beautiful cities were stripped for resources. Their libraries and museums were destroyed. The Void Hunters resumed their planet-cracking operations. These creatures fed on the energy released when worlds were destroyed. Humans had negotiated strict limits on their feeding. They could only crack dead planets or asteroids, never worlds with life. But the agreements meant nothing without human enforcement. The Void Hunters began destroying inhabited planets, consuming entire ecosystems in their hunger for energy. Billions of beings died screaming as their worlds were torn apart. The Council tried to stop these atrocities, but they had no unity. Without human mediators, the different species could not even agree on basic meeting procedures. Councillor Irix demanded that meetings follow reptilian dominance customs. This meant the strongest member spoke first, and others could only respond when given permission. Councillor Gethmore insisted on crystalline ritual precedence, where the oldest member made all decisions after hearing everyone else's opinion. The hegemony representative wanted military hierarchy. The Void Hunters preferred pack dynamics. Each species tried to force their own social structure on the group. Meetings turned into shouting matches. Some sessions ended in actual violence as different species fought over who had the right to speak. The council chamber was damaged several times and had to be repaired. Meanwhile, environmental disasters were spreading across the galaxy. Researcher Park Hansel had been humanity's leading expert on terraforming and ecological balance. He had created complex models that predicted how different species and environments would interact. The council had dismissed his work as overly complicated human thinking. They preferred simple approaches that focused on one factor at a time. They ignored his warnings about the delicate balance needed to maintain terraformed worlds. Now, those worlds were dying. On New Harmony, the atmospheric processors began producing too much oxygen. The human engineers who ran them had left detailed instructions, but the alien replacements did not understand the subtle adjustments needed. The oxygen levels rose until fires began breaking out spontaneously. The planet's surface became uninhabitable. On Verdant Prime, the carefully designed ecosystem collapsed when one key species went extinct. Park Hansel had predicted this possibility and created backup populations in protected reserves. But the new administrators thought the reserves were a waste of space and converted them to farmland. When the ecosystem failed, nothing could be done to save it. Dozens of worlds suffered similar fates. Atmospheres became toxic. Weather patterns went chaotic. Food chains collapsed. Billions of people were forced to evacuate their homes and become refugees. The refugee crisis overwhelmed the galaxy's remaining infrastructure. Homeless populations filled space stations and crowded onto surviving worlds. Food and medical supplies ran short. Disease spread through the overcrowded camps. On Earth, Director O. Sumin of the Xenological Institute received daily intelligence reports. Her job was to study alien behavior and predict their actions. The predictions had been accurate down to the smallest detail. "It is happening exactly as our model showed," she told Admiral Lee Sun-woo. "Their cooperation was completely dependent on our mediation. Without us, they default to their natural behaviors, aggression, territorial expansion, and dominance hierarchies." Admiral Lee studied the reports with sad eyes. "How many have died? Conservative estimate? 50 billion in the first year. The EO number is growing exponentially. Some people in the Terran government wanted to intervene. We cannot just watch genocide happen," argued Defense Minister Ryu Min-jae. "Our values mean nothing if we abandon them when they become difficult." But President Jin was firm. "Our values are exactly why we left. We spent centuries trying to teach them a better way. They rejected our teachings and called us weak. Now, they learn the consequences of their choices." Admiral Lee reinforced the border defenses. More refugee fleets gathered at the edges of human space every day. They broadcast desperate pleas for help. Children could be heard crying on the emergency frequencies. The sounds broke the hearts of many human soldiers and civilians, but the borders remained closed. Captain John Minji commanded the border station at Alpha Centauri. She was young for such an important position, but she had proven herself capable. Every day she watched alien ships approach the border and turn away when they received no response. "Sir," she asked Admiral Lee during a video conference, "how long do we maintain Protocol 7? "Until they understand," he replied. "Until they truly understand what they lost when they drove us away. And if they never understand? If they all die?" Admiral Lee was quiet for a long moment. "Then the galaxy will be a very different place. But it will be the place they chose to create." The cascade of failures was accelerating. Each broken system caused two more to fail. Each act of aggression inspired others. Each environmental disaster made resources scarcer and conflict more likely. The galaxy that had once seemed so stable and advanced was revealing itself to be built on a foundation of human compassion and cooperation. Without that foundation, Everything was falling apart, and humanity watched from behind their closed borders, waiting for the lesson to sink in. 2 years had passed since humanity left without a word. The Galactic Council was in complete chaos. What had once been the most powerful organization in known space now struggled to hold a single meeting without violence breaking out. Speaker. Vextar stood in his private chambers aboard Nexus Prime, staring at reports that filled him with dread. His blue skin had faded to a sickly pale color. His 4 arms trembled as he read the latest casualty figures. The Thraxian-Molari War had consumed 12 star systems. The Andorian plague had spread to 17 species. Trade had collapsed so completely that some worlds were reverting to Stone Age technology. The refugee crisis had displaced over 1 trillion beings, but worst of all, the Council could do nothing about any of it. "We need the humans back," Vextar whispered to himself. The words felt like poison in his mouth. For years, he had worked to reduce human influence in the Council. He had called them primitive and emotional. He had laughed at their naive belief in universal rights and dignity. Now he would give anything to hear Ambassador Kang Daeho's calm voice suggesting a compromise. Vextar called an emergency meeting of the remaining council leadership. Only half the invited members showed up. The others were too busy dealing with crises in their own territories. "We must find the humans," Vextar announced. "We must bring them back." Counselor Erix of the Reptilians hissed angrily. "You want to crawl back to those soft-skinned weaklings? We are superior beings. We do not beg for help from primitives." "Primitives who kept our civilization functioning," replied Counselor Zethai. Her tentacles were wrapped tightly around her chair, a sign of extreme stress. "Look around you, Irix. Look at what our superiority has accomplished." Through the chamber's massive windows, they could see refugee ships drifting in space around the station, thousands of them, filled with beings who had lost their homes to war, plague, or environmental collapse. "Fine," Erix said finally, "but we approach them as equals, not as beggars." Zethai laughed bitterly. "Equals? After what we have done? After how we treated them? We drove away the only species that cared about anyone besides themselves. We are going as beggars because that is what we are." Vextar organized an expedition to the edges of known space, seeking any sign of human presence. The expedition consisted of ships from 12 different species, though getting them to work together was nearly impossible without human coordination. They searched the border regions methodically. They found abandoned human facilities everywhere. Research stations, trade posts, communication relays, and defense platforms. All had been left in perfect condition, but completely empty. The automated systems still functioned. When alien ships approached, polite messages were broadcast in hundreds of languages. "This facility has been deactivated. Please proceed to your destination. Have a pleasant journey." The tone was friendly but final. No requests for communication were acknowledged. No offers of trade were accepted. No pleas for help received any response. On the border world of Kepler 442c, the expedition discovered Dr. Kim Young-ho's former laboratory. It had been the galaxy's center for universal communication research. Dr. Kim had been working on something he called Universal Translation Protocols, a system for facilitating communication between species with completely different ways of thinking. The Council had ridiculed his work as typically human overcomplicated thinking. They pointed out that the galaxy already had translation technology. Why did humans always insist on making simple things complex? Now, as they explored his abandoned laboratory, they began to understand the existing translation systems only converted words from one language to another. Dr. Kim had been working on something much deeper, translating entire ways of thinking. His research notes, left behind in neat piles, showed the scope of the project. He had identified fundamental differences in how various species processed information. Crystallines thought in geological timescales. Void hunters thought in pure predation cycles. the hegemony thought in dominance hierarchies. Each species operated on completely different paradigms. They literally could not understand each other's motivations and goals. Only humans, with their flexible thinking and emotional intelligence, could bridge these gaps. Dr. Kim had been developing protocols that would allow true communication between incompatible worldviews. His system would have revolutionized diplomacy and cooperation throughout the galaxy. But the research was incomplete. The crucial final steps required insights that only Dr. Kim possessed. His unique understanding of how different minds worked could not be replicated by other species. The expedition moved on to other abandoned human facilities. Each one told a similar story: brilliant work left unfinished, problems half solved, systems dependent on human oversight. They found Professor Bei Jinsu's Xenopsychological Research Center. His studies into interspecies cooperation had been dismissed as soft science by the Council. They preferred hard data and logical analysis over psychological theories. Now his research was worth more than entire planets. His insights into why different species behaved the way they did had become the galaxy's most sought-after knowledge. But Professor Bei was gone, and his work was too complex for others to continue. The expedition tried to enter human space directly. They approached the border with white flags of truce and broadcast messages of peace on all frequencies. The response was always the same: polite deflection. "This is the Terran Border Authority," came the automated reply. "Human space is currently closed to non-human visitors. We thank you for your interest and wish you well on your journey." When they tried to force their way past the border, they encountered something unexpected. The human defenses did not attack them. Instead, they found themselves gently but irresistibly turned around. Their ship's navigation systems were overridden by some kind of field that pointed them back toward galactic space. No violence was used. No weapons were fired. The humans simply would not allow anyone to enter their territory. Desperate, the Council began sending increasingly valuable offers to Earth. They offered entire star systems as tribute. They promised to make humans the dominant species in the Council. They offered technological knowledge, rare resources, and complete political surrender. All messages went unanswered. Counselor Zethai collapsed during one council session, finally understanding the full magnitude of their mistake. She had been studying human diplomatic records, trying to understand how they had made the impossible work. "We did not just lose our mediators," she whispered as medical teams helped her from the chamber. "We lost our teachers. We lost the only species that knew how to make peace between enemies." The records showed hundreds of conflicts that humans had resolved. Wars that had raged for centuries ended with patient negotiation. Trade disputes that had threatened to destroy entire economies solved with creative compromises. Environmental disasters prevented through careful cooperation between species. In every case, the solution had required something that only humans possessed: the ability to see the conflict from all sides simultaneously. Other species could understand their own perspective perfectly, but humans could understand everyone's perspective and find common ground between them. Vextar spent sleepless nights reading through old council transcripts. He found speech after speech by human ambassadors warning about exactly the problems the galaxy now faced. Every disaster had been predicted. Every crisis had been foreseen. The humans had tried to teach them. They had shared their knowledge freely. They had worked tirelessly to build a better galaxy for everyone, and the Council had called them weak, primitive, and emotional. Now Vextar understood the truth. Humans were not weak. They were strong enough to care about others even when it cost them dearly. They were not primitive. They were advanced enough to value life over profit. They were not emotional. They were wise enough to know that emotion and logic worked better together than apart. The expedition returned to Nexus, Prime with empty hands and heavy hearts. They had found no way to contact humanity. They had discovered no weakness in human defenses. They had learned only one thing for certain. Humanity was not coming back until the galaxy proved it had learned its lesson. But the galaxy was dying too quickly for slow learning. Every day brought new disasters. Every week saw another species, pushed to the edge of extinction. Every month, the cascade of failures accelerated. Time was running out, and the Council had no idea how to stop the collapse they had caused. 5 years had passed since humanity's silent departure. Galactic civilization was dying. The Andorian plague had become unstoppable. Dr. Choi Mina's research, which had been so close to finding a cure, remained incomplete in her abandoned laboratory. 17 species were now infected. Entire worlds lay under quarantine, their populations slowly dying, while the galaxy's remaining medical experts argued over treatment methods they did not understand. The plague had mutated in ways that Dr. Choi had predicted in her notes. She had written detailed warnings about how the disease would adapt if not treated quickly with her specific protocol, but her warnings went unread until it was too late. The new strains were immune to all known treatments. On Andoria Prime, the last major city had been evacuated. Streets that once bustled with millions of beings now lay empty, except for the dead. The planetary government broadcast a final message to the galaxy. We die as we lived, with hope that others will learn from our fate. Forgive those who could have saved us but chose not to. The message was clearly directed at humanity, but human space remained silent. The Thraxian-Malari War had become a galactic infection, spreading to other species. With no mediators to contain the conflict, neighboring systems were drawn into the fighting. The Crystalline Assembly attacked Thraxian supply lines. The hegemony invaded Malari territory. The Void Hunters fed on the energy released by destroyed planets. What had started as a border dispute between two species had become a free-for-all war involving dozens of civilizations. Ancient grudges and territorial ambitions, long held in check by human diplomacy, exploded into open violence. The technological infrastructure of the galaxy was crumbling. Chief Engineer An Soo-young's maintenance protocols had apparently been more critical than anyone realized. Without her teams constantly adjusting and repairing the systems, everything was breaking down. Jump gates failed regularly, stranding. Ships in empty space. Space stations drifted dead in the void when their fusion reactors shut down. Communication relays went dark one by one, leaving entire sectors isolated from the rest of the galaxy. The irony was bitter. The galaxy had achieved incredible technological advancement, but it all depended on human expertise to function. The other species had focused on conquest, trade, and expansion, while leaving the boring work of maintenance to humans. Now they paid the price for their arrogance. On Luna Station, Admiral Kwon Tae-hyun monitored the galaxy's death throes from his command center. His hair had gone completely white in the 5 years since the withdrawal began. The weight of watching civilizations collapse was crushing, even when he knew it was necessary. "Sir," reported Captain John Minji, "we're receiving another transmission from the Epsilon survivors." The Epsilon colonies had been among the first, victims of the hegemony's aggression. Their entire species had been enslaved, their worlds stripped of resources. Only a few thousand had escaped to become refugees wandering the galaxy. Their leader, Yil-Tar, had been a friend to many humans. He was an artist and philosopher who had spent years studying human culture. His messages always came on the same frequency that humans had used for emergency communications. "Please," Yil-Tar's voice crackled through the static. "We know you can hear us. Our children ask why the humans don't come anymore. They remember the stories we told them about your kindness. They don't understand why you've abandoned us." Captain John's eyes filled with tears. She had known Yil-Tar personally before the withdrawal. They had exchanged letters about art and poetry. His species had never done anything to deserve their fate. "What are your orders, sir?" she asked Admiral Kwon. Protocol 7 remains in effect, he replied, though his voice was heavy with pain. No response to any non-human communication. The worst moment came when the hegemony attacked the sanctuary worlds. These were planets that humanity had declared protected zones for developing species. Young civilizations that had not yet achieved spaceflight were given safe areas to grow and evolve without interference. The protection had been guaranteed by human military force for over 3 centuries. Hundreds of species had developed under human guardianship, growing from primitive tribes to advanced societies, but the guardians were gone. The hegemony attacked without warning. They had always resented the sanctuary worlds, seeing them as wasted, resources that could be better used for mining and manufacturing. With humans gone, nothing stood in their way. The genocide was swift and total. Billions of innocent beings died in the space of a few days. Entire civilizations that had taken millions of years to evolve were snuffed out in hours. Archaeological treasures spanning countless ages were destroyed for their mineral content. The few survivors broadcast desperate pleas on frequencies they had learned from human teachers. "Where are our protectors?" they cried. "Have we been forgotten? Have we done something wrong?" The messages reached Earth, but Earth stayed silent. President Jin Yong-soo called an emergency cabinet meeting when the reports of the Sanctuary World massacres arrived. The intelligence was provided by human spy networks that still operated in galactic space, watching everything but interfering with nothing. 14 billion sentients dead, reported Intelligence Director Park Soy-yeon. 47 developing, civilizations completely extinct. The hegemony is stripping the planets for rare metals. Defense Minister Ryu Min-jae slammed his fist on the table. "This is exactly what we swore to prevent. Our entire military exists to protect those who cannot protect themselves. And we did protect them," replied President Jin calmly. "For 300 years, we sacrificed human lives and resources to keep them safe. We were called naive for caring about primitive species. We were mocked for wasting time on beings that would never contribute to galactic civilization. But they were innocent." Yes, they were. Just as we were innocent when the Council treated us as inferiors. Just as the Epsilon were innocent when they were enslaved. Just as the Andorians were innocent when they were left to die of plague. President Jin stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth's peaceful cities. The galaxy made its choice. Minister Ryu. They chose might over right. They chose profit over compassion. They chose superiority over cooperation. Every species that died was a victim of that choice. So we just watch. We do nothing. "We do the hardest thing of all," she replied. "We let them learn from their mistakes, no matter how terrible the cost." Some in the human government argued for limited intervention. "We could send medical aid for the plague," suggested Health Minister Lee Ji-young, "or food for the refugees, small actions that don't require direct contact." But Admiral Lee Sun-woo, now elderly but still sharp, disagreed. "Any aid we send will be seen as weakness. They will think they can push us just far enough to get help without actually changing their behavior. The lesson only works if it is complete." The debates raged in human government for weeks, but the final decision remained unchanged. Operation Silent Sky would continue until the galaxy truly understood what it had lost. On the border station. At Alpha Centauri, Captain Jeon Minji watched another refugee fleet approach. This one was different from the others. It was led by ships flying the flags of the Galactic Council itself. "Sir," she reported to Admiral Kwan, "it's Speaker Vextar himself. He's requesting permission to enter human space for direct negotiations." Admiral Kwan studied the display showing the approaching fleet. Vextar's flagship was a magnificent vessel, but it looked somehow small and fragile against the backdrop of space. Behind it followed dozens of other ships carrying representatives from across the galaxy. "Any escorts?" he asked. "None, sir. They're completely unarmed. They're broadcasting on all frequencies that they come in peace, seeking dialogue." Their previous messages? Increasingly desperate, sir. They're offering complete political surrender, full human control of the Council, anything we want. Admiral Quan was quiet for a long moment. The offer was everything humanity could have asked for. Total victory without firing a shot. The ability to reshape galactic civilization according to human values. But it was not enough. Not yet. "Send the standard response," he ordered. Human space remains closed. As he watched Vexatar's fleet turn away yet again, Admiral Quan wondered if the lesson would ever sink in. How many more had to die before the galaxy understood that cooperation could not be forced, only chosen? The breaking point was approaching. Soon, the choice would no longer be whether to help, but whether there would be anyone left to save. 10 years had passed since humanity left without a word. The galaxy was dying, and everyone knew it. Speaker Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, staring at the edge of human space. His once proud form was bent with age and defeat. His blue skin had faded to gray. His forearms trembled with weakness. Behind him, representatives from every remaining civilization in the galaxy waited in silence. They had come not as conquerors or negotiators. They had come as beggars. The mighty Galactic Council, which had once ruled over thousands of species and millions of worlds, was reduced to a few dozen ships drifting at the border of human territory. Their great civilization lay in ruins behind them. The numbers were too terrible to fully comprehend. Over 500 billion beings had died in the wars that followed humanity's departure. Entire species had gone extinct. Hundreds of worlds were now lifeless rocks, stripped of resources or consumed by plague. The trade network that had connected the galaxy for millennia was completely gone. Planets that had not achieved self-sufficiency were reverting to pre-industrial technology. Knowledge was being lost as fast as the beings who carried it died. But worst of all was the silence from Earth. For 10 years, the Council had sent messages, offers, and pleas. They had offered tribute, territory, and total surrender. They had admitted their mistakes and begged for forgiveness. They had promised to do anything, give anything. If only humanity would return. Every message went unanswered. Human space remained closed, protected by defenses that gently but firmly turned away all visitors. The humans were still there. Their cities still gleamed on Earth, their ships still patrolled their borders, but they might as well have been ghosts. "Speaker Vextar," said Counselor Zethai, her voice barely a whisper. "The automated systems are responding." A familiar message appeared on their screens. "This is the Terran Border Authority. Human space is currently closed to non-human visitors. We thank you for your interest and wish you well on your journey." But this time, something was different. A second message followed. "Admiral Lee Sunwoo has been authorized to speak with you. Prepare for communication in 1 hour." Vexatar felt his heart stop beating for a moment. After 10 years of silence, humanity was finally willing to talk. The hour that followed was the longest of Vextar's life. He used the time to prepare what might be the most important speech in galactic history. Around him, the other council members whispered prayers in their various languages and hoped for mercy they did not deserve. When Admiral Lee's image appeared on their screens, many of the aliens gasped. The human looked ancient, his face lined, with years of difficult decisions. His eyes were sad but determined. "Speaker Vextar," Admiral Lee said simply, "you wanted to talk. Talk." Vextar had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, but now all his prepared words seemed inadequate. How do you apologize for the destruction of a galaxy? How do you explain 10 years of suffering caused by pride and prejudice? "Admiral," he began, his translator struggling with concepts his species had no words for, "we were wrong. We were so terribly, horribly wrong." "About what, specifically?" "About everything. About you. About ourselves. about what civilization really means. Vextar's voice broke as he continued. We thought strength meant the ability to dominate others. We thought intelligence meant the ability to exploit resources efficiently. We thought advancement meant the ability to take what we wanted by force. Admiral Lee listened without expression. But you showed us a different way, Vextar continued. You showed us that real strength meant protecting those weaker than yourself. You showed us that real intelligence meant finding solutions that benefited everyone. You showed us that real advancement meant building something that lasted, something that made life better for all beings. And what did you do with those lessons? We rejected them. We called your compassion weakness. We called your cooperation naivety. We called your values primitive emotions. Vexatar could barely speak through his shame. We drove away the only species that cared about anyone besides themselves. Behind Admiral Lee, other figures appeared, on the screen. Captain Jeon Minji, now a general, Ambassador Yoon Seokjin, whose grandmother had been one of the last human diplomats to leave galactic space. Dr. Han Ji-young, whose parents had worked on the Andorian plague cure. This was humanity's new leadership, grown up watching the galaxy burn from afar. You want us to return, Admiral Lee said. It was not a question. Yes, Vexatar replied. We need you. The galaxy needs you. Without you, we are nothing but animals fighting over scraps. And what would you offer in return? Vexatar had expected this question. Everything. Complete restructuring of the Council with human oversight, binding protection laws for all developing species, universal rights declarations, the immediate cessation of all territorial expansion by the major powers. Material things, Admiral Lee observed. Political arrangements, treaties, and laws. Yes, anything you want. But what about understanding? Vextar was confused. Understanding? Do you understand why we left? Do you understand what you lost when you drove us away? The question hung in space between them. Vextar thought of the billions who had died, the civilizations that had fallen, the knowledge that had been lost. But he sensed that Admiral Lee was asking about something deeper. You were not just our mediators, Vextar said slowly, working through the concept. You were our teachers. You were the only species that knew how to build instead of just taking. You were the only ones who cared about making life better for everyone, not just yourselves. Admiral Lee nodded slightly. Continue. You tried to teach us your values, compassion, cooperation, individual dignity. We thought these were weaknesses because they sometimes required sacrifice. We did not understand that they were actually strengths that made civilization possible. And now? Now we understand that a galaxy without mercy is a galaxy without hope, that a civilization built on exploitation will always collapse, that caring for others is not weakness, it is the foundation that everything else is built on. Admiral Lee was quiet for a long moment. Behind him, the other human leaders watched and waited. Finally, he spoke. The terms you offer are acceptable, but they are not enough. Vextar felt his hopes crash. What more do you want? Acknowledgement. The galaxy must formally recognize that humanity's values, the values you called primitive, are not weaknesses to be overcome, but strengths to be embraced. Every species must swear to uphold the principle that all sentient life has inherent dignity and worth. Yes, Vextar said immediately. Yes, of course. And understanding. True understanding. You must learn not just to follow our rules, but to understand why those rules exist. You must learn to see the universe through eyes of compassion instead of conquest. We will learn. We want to learn. Admiral Lee looked at the faces of the other human leaders. Some argument seemed to pass between them in glances and subtle expressions. Finally, he turned back to the screen. President Park Soyeon will address the galaxy in 1 hour. Prepare your people. The transmission ended. leaving the alien fleet in stunned silence. After 10 years of rejection, humanity was finally coming home. An hour later, every remaining communication system in the galaxy carried the same signal. President Park Soyeon, a woman who had grown up in the shadow of humanity's withdrawal, spoke to the surviving civilizations. "We return not as conquerors, but as teachers. We left so you could learn what a galaxy without mercy looks like. The lesson was harsh, and we grieve for every life lost in the learning. But the lesson was necessary." Her voice was calm but firm, carrying the authority of a species that had proven their worth through absence. "Now, if you truly wish it, we will show you what a galaxy with hope can become. We will help you rebuild, not as masters and servants, but as partners working toward a common future. The choice, as always, is yours." The first human ships began their journey back to the stars the next day. They carried with them not weapons or wealth, but doctors, teachers, and engineers. Humanity had left without a word to teach the galaxy a lesson about necessity. Now they returned with a whisper that began to rebuild civilization. "We forgive you," but forgiveness, everyone understood, was not the same as forgetting. The galaxy had been given a second chance, bought with the blood of billions. They would not waste it again. 20 years later, Ambassador Kang Soo-jin took her father's old seat in the rebuilt council chambers. The galaxy had been transformed, stronger and more just than before. The scars remained, dead worlds served, as monuments to pride, but life flourished under humanity's gentle guidance. The lesson echoed through the ages. Sometimes the greatest mercy is walking away. Sometimes the greatest strength is returning despite the pain. And sometimes those called weak prove to be the foundation upon which all strength rests. The galaxy had learned that when humanity left without a word, they took with them something irreplaceable, hope itself. And when hope returned, it brought forgiveness in its wake.